Hi. The series on the Cyber Resilience Act. As you know, Cyber Resilience Act is a European regulation, cybersecurity requirements as part of CE marking for products with digital elements. That was published in the official journal of the European Union on the 20th of November 24. And all of this was explained actually in our previous webinar. So if you're new to this, I strongly suggest you to have a look at the previous webinar. Either the link will be shared as part of this one, or you can request a link. I'm Maxim Baele. I'm a principal consultant product security at Torion. I'm also one of the volunteers for OWASP Belgium, one of the OWASP SAM core team members, and I'm following up on the Cyber Resilience Act quite closely, and following as it goes through the legislative process and standardization is happening. And today's webinar is going to focus on preparing for the Cyber Resilience Act, specifically with OWASP SAM, but I've left OWASP SAM out of this because it's more than just processes. There's a ton of work that needs to happen in order for organizations to build compliant products. Last time I already mentioned it is kind of an iceberg. It is an outcome-based regulation. I want to clarify this a little bit. So what does an outcome-based regulation actually mean? Well, if you have the example of user set passwords, and you have a very specific requirement. In this case, user set passwords should be at least 8 characters in length and supporting up to 128 characters. That is not an outcome. That is a very specific technical requirement. If you compare this to what the CRA requests, ensure protection from unauthorized access by appropriate control mechanisms, that is an outcome. The appropriate, that is the very, very, very specific term here that makes this an outcome-based regulation. CRA expects you to build secure products. And what security is, it is up to you, or what the level of security required is, that is up to you to determine. Once you have determined this, once you have built a product that according to your analysis is secure enough, then you establish a declaration of conformity supported by technical documentation and proving basically that your product is secured by design, secured by default, that you've used risk assessment when selecting security requirements, and that you're doing active vulnerability management. But in order to do this, the iceberg needs to go deeper. Again, as mentioned in our previous webinar, in order to build products that are secure by design and secure by default, security needs to be there in every single step of the development lifecycle. We call this also shifting left on security. That is not just doing security scanning at the end and moving this to having some policies. It's really every step of the development lifecycle needs to incorporate some cybersecurity elements. But this development lifecycle, if when represented here, kind of like a waterfall type system, I consider these 5 phases to be present in every single product development lifecycle. In this case, operations might also incorporate manufacturing if we're really talking about physical products. But the development lifecycle covers your product from actual ideation, inception, overbuilding, manufacturing, towards its end of life. If you're building software, of course, you might not always have this quite waterfall style flow in there, but still you have the same phases in your development lifecycle. Some phases will be longer, some phases will be shorter. You will iterate over them, but in essence, these phases will be present. However, well, if we look at the customers, where today we're doing assessments of their development lifecycle, assessments of Cyber Resilience Act readiness, and we're looking at how they're producing products, and in that case, what is there? What we observe is that a lot of organizations these days, they do development and they create products, but they lack a overarching development lifecycle. They lack the formality that describes the different phases of their product development process. And very often, there's no guaranteed end-of-life date, especially not when starting to develop a product. And that's where my first advice comes in. So if you see this pointy thing in the top left corner, this will be advice, pragmatic advice, I hope, directly for you. takeaways from you after this webinar. So I would suggest start formally describing your product development lifecycle. So we're nearing the end of the year. Hopefully for you, this will be a little bit a quieter period compared to the other periods of the year. And this is the moment where you can actually hopefully spend some time to document what does our product development lifecycle looks like. I don't know if you're going to be able to define the support period for your current products in that same time period, but at least start having conversations with your product management and with your management on how long you will probably be supporting your current generation of products. And then finally, document the current way of working in the development teams. Give your engineers, your architects, your developers, give them some time to document how they're currently working. And the reason why I'm asking you to describe your development lifecycle is because in a later phase, this is where you can start adding security touch or identifying security touch points. The reason I'm asking you to define the support period for your current products is to prioritize the work that needs to be done. If you have products that are going to be shipped, are going to be changing after the CRA takes effect on the 11th of December 2027, you might want to prioritize the work there. And I'm asking you to document the current way of working in the development teams, because there is an aspect of formality now with the Cyber Resilience Act that is new to lots of organizations. Especially in smaller organizations, you might be very lean, you might be very technical, and development teams might have some documentation in code, or they just have some processes that I would say are verbal in nature. Everyone just does the right thing. But with the Cyber Resilience Act, what's coming to happen is that there's this third party that's potentially coming to have a look at how well you are doing these processes. And that is going to prove your due diligence, like how well have you been carrying out the requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act? How well are you doing your due diligence, basically? That is also tied to an outcome-based regulation. There's no technical requirements. The technical requirements are not from that level of detail that they can be pass or fail. They always need to be analyzed as part of your current situation. And you need to prove that you did the analysis that led to the correct selection of your security requirements. So what is due diligence? Well, Cambridge Dictionary mentions that is the action that is considered reasonable for people to take in order to keep themselves or others and their property safe. In Dutch, we say een redelijk persoon op de straat. Well, this considered reasonable, again, that is the link to the CRA or CRA compliance. And you do this in a risk-based manner. Because if you look at the Cyber Resilience Act, if you look at Article 13, these are the obligations for the manufacturers, we see that manufacturers shall undertake an assessment of cybersecurity risks associated with a product with digital elements. You'll need to do a risk assessment. The outcome of that risk assessment needs to be taken into account during planning, design, development, production, delivery, and maintenance. These are your phases in the development lifecycle. And you need to do this with a view to minimize cybersecurity risk and preventing incidents and minimize their impact, not just on a cybersecurity perspective, but including in relation to the health and safety of the users. This means that risk assessment is the absolute foundational activity for Cyber Resilience Act compliance. However, if you look at the regulation, if you look at the current state of standardization, there's no methodology that's enforced for you to do risk assessment. Again, there's an outcome. Do risk assessment, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. It doesn't tell you what methodology to use, because also that will be dependent. You can probably get away with a much leaner, much simpler process if you're a small organization building a non-critical product than if you're building a product that's in use in, for example, critical infrastructure. And then the other thing is product risk is different from enterprise risk. And this is new for a lot of organizations. Even in larger organizations today, they're used to managing business or enterprise risk, and they're used to looking at the potential impact to the business, to losses of the business, outages that they can calculate. But now with product risk, you're putting yourself in the shoes of your end user, and you're going to assess how they're going to operate your product and how they might be negatively impacted by things that your product might be lacking. And then, well, this risk assessment, as mentioned, it informs both the product features, so it helps you select the Cyber Resilience Act essential requirements, as described from the Annex 1, and the product lifecycle processes. That's everything under the waterline of the iceberg. When we zoom into the product features, then hopefully here comes some pragmatic advice again. Take the time to define what your product does. Even if today you have already a description of your products, and this might be the case, especially if you're producing products that are subject to the CE regulation. Today you will already need to describe what your product does, and you're doing already a declaration of conformity. You're also describing your expected context. However, today this is not done from a security perspective. So take some time to define what your product does and describe the expected context. If you're building, for example, a network video recorder, of course, you're going to integrate with video cameras that are also networked. You're going to describe the type of users it's intended, are the intended audience, but potentially even the level of, I would say, aptitude with IT systems that they might have. You're going to describe what kind of a environment the product is meant to be deployed in. Is it meant to be deployed in a home setting? It's meant to be used for building security in larger environments. Might it even be used for critical infrastructure? Describe this clearly, because all of this, and I talked a lot about this already in the previous webinar, all of this is based on building up this shared responsibility model. If you clearly describe what type of product you have, what the expected context is, this forms a basis of delineating where your responsibilities as a manufacturer end. Basically, you do your best to cover your part of manufacturing devices as secure as possible, and gives all of the best tools in hands of your end users to determine whether it's the right product for them, and basically how they can securely operate and implement the product. But it's not just a product that's with the end users. Many products, and especially in this example with a network video recorder, will have a cloud backend or a SaaS backend. I forgot the term for the, is the PDE and their, basically the cloud backend. Forgot the term. But if you're hosting a cloud backend for yourself, make sure that this is part of the architectural diagram. That's the second thing. After defining what your product does, collect or create high-level architectural drawings. Many organizations will have architectural drawings, and this is fine. But if we come in, again, as cybersecurity consultants, what we're looking for is not just the architectural drawings, it's the architectural drawings from a security perspective. And this is a different view. All of this, like the basic architecture diagrams, component diagrams, network diagrams, this all helps. But from a security perspective, what you're going to do is you're going to look at interconnectivity. You're going to look at the types of data that flow over certain links. You're going to take into account who is operating what part of the system, because this forms the basis for threat modeling. And I'm putting a whiteboard here because threat modeling, as the absolute easiest or in its absolute simplest form, you're just going to go with a few engineers, with a few of your people into a meeting room, and you're going to draw on a whiteboard. Really simple. This is what we're building. These are the interconnectivity. That's the type of data. Because this allows you to have conversations on what could go wrong. So in traditional architecture, you would have, you could purely depend on it needs to be deployed in a secure environment. But under the CRA, this doesn't fit anymore. These days, or not just under the CRA, in modern times, data is the actual boundary. And so you need to define your data flows. And this allows you to make the link between your actual architecture and the security requirements that you need to select. Threat modeling basically forms the link between your risk assessment. And I mentioned already risk assessment, there's no methodology enforced. So you're basically left with looking what is out there and could be used for product risk. There are some methodologies, for example, Octave Allegro could be used if you're looking at assets. Even standards like EN 18031, which is right now used for the radio equipment directive, has a type of risk assessment methodology in there. IC 62443 has a type of risk assessment methodology. But the simplest form is just something you build yourself. So for most organizations, I would expect that you would be okay with having a way to determine risk and evaluating risks in a more or less formal way. As long as you formally document the outputs, you should be fine. As long as your risk assessment properly covers the actual requirements, you're fine. And so right now, my recommendation is for other organizations, start with the 4 questions framework, because this from the get-go was meant to be used for threat modeling. And the 4 questions are, what are we working on? What could go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And specifically, I indicated here on the networks the trust boundaries. You're going to, first of all, have these 4 questions and ask them about your overall architecture. And then you're going to go deeper. You're going to ask these questions on the actual lower level architectures. This is where you start to threat model. So you're diagramming first your high level, your product level, and then for each component, you're going to divide this up, look at the data flows, look at the trust boundaries. And there's methodologies like Stride, for example, or PASTA, attack trees that allow you to, for each of these trust boundaries, methodically analyze what could go wrong. At Torion, we recommend Stride, or we use Stride mostly. Stride stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And this is something that is relatively easily explained, takes some training to do, but with the 4 questions framework and Stride, you basically can build a risk assessment and threat modeling methodology that links the Cyber Resilience Act requirements into actual requirements that you can be using for your product, that basically that you can give to your engineers. Again, here, like with risk assessment, no methodology is enforced. It is up to you to document outcomes from your exercise for internal and for external use. So your threat modeling will need to be part of your technical documentation. And your high-level threat model will need to be part even of your user documentation. So you need to determine, again, this is your context, like what would be a potentially risky situation? Well, if you have this network video recorder and you would deploy this not in a shielded LAN environment, but you would deploy this in a demilitarized zone or somewhere with direct access to the internet, this would be a potentially risky scenario. This is the foundation of your user documentation, the foundation of the documentation that supports the shared responsibility model. Now, threat modeling itself, the reason why we also recommend this, because it's relatively easy to learn as a technical person. And Book on Screen is, I would say, one of the authoritative works. There's more and more books being published as it becomes really more mainstream. There's other regulations, for example, that require you to do threat modeling already, like the medical device regulation. This one is from Adam Shostak. The 4 questions framework is a paper that he also publishes, which is with his associates. Adam is one of the people also behind the threat modeling manifesto from a couple of years ago. We have 2 people at Torion who also contributed to this manifesto. And with Torion, of course, we're well renowned for threat modeling training. Been giving it at Black Hat for many years now. Always well regarded. And if you want to keep on top of threat modeling, we have the Threat Modeling Insider newsletter. And yeah, many of our people are also active on Slack. I'll get to this later. What I wanted to mention, or the reason why I'm mentioning this, is because learning threat modeling, especially for a somewhat technical person, is relatively easy. Let me put it like this. The issue is that it needs to be a continuous process. It needs to be tied into risk management. And this is actually the hardest part for threat modeling. So if we look at the overarching processes, again, in our development lifecycle, policies and processes are where you describe how you develop your products today. The risk assessment, that is the key to getting the Cyber Resilience Act requirements in. Your threat model links this high-level risk assessment then to your product requirements. I'm sorry, to your product requirements. And then finally, you're going to validate. Did you do a good job? And as you start doing this, threat modeling once is quite easy, but making this part of your organization's DNA, making this part really of your process, that is hard. That's what we observe is the hardest for an organization. And that is not product change, because most organizations, they know how to build products and how to add features to products. But change management, adding new processes, that tends to be new or tends to be where the delays can happen. So if you have this product today that you're still going to sell after the Cyber Resilience Act takes effect, or even you're developing this product and you know it's going to come on the market after the Cyber Resilience Act takes effect. It might not have been developed with all security in mind from the get-go. So now you're tasked with making this product secure and seeing through the iceberg of requirements, adding each time aspects of your processes, security touchpoints. You're going to introduce security scanning. You're going to introduce defect management. You're going to also, for example, do code reviews for security. You're going to do a pen test, whatever. You're going to add all of these individual steps. Then you're going to build a secure development lifecycle. And seeing through this, that's why the arrow is there. This is where OWASP SAM comes in. So SAM is a software assurance maturity model. Was already developed in 2009, and we're now at version 2.10. Is a prescriptive standard on basically how to build a secure development lifecycle. It's available on owaspsam.org, and this is what I recommend to cover your product lifecycle processes. So as you introduce the product, SAM helps you basically see through this whole process. It can be used as an educational tool, and especially in larger or more lean organizations, having a read through the relevant practices of SAM gives you an idea of what is out there that you could be doing. It could be used as a planning tool in any kind of organization, in small or medium-sized organizations, but especially in medium and large-sized organizations, it really comes into its own when you're going to implement a set of processes across a wide variety of teams that might be supporting a wide variety of processes. And in that sense, it is an implementation tool, a tool to help you prepare for product certification and legislative compliance. So for those of you who are not familiar with OWASP in general, well, OWASP is the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, already created in 2001 when application security was this hot new thing and was nothing around there. And it's a set of tools, guidance, standards, but most of all, it's a community of people that are collaborating on creating these tools, creating this guidance, taking people in when they're looking for advice on how to build secure applications, how to build secure products. And it's project-based. You might know projects like the OWASP Top 10. You might know projects like OWASP, now not anymore, ZAP has its own thing. Dependency Track is also from OWASP, and SAM, of course. So we have our flagship projects. The other thing is the Application Security Verification Standard, the ASVS. So it's a whole set of projects that can help you build basically secure applications and secure products. SAM is one of these projects, and SAM consists of these 5 business functions that you see here on top of the screen for a while. Each business function is further divided up into 3 security practices, each practice into streams, and each stream into 3 separate maturity levels. If we look at the whole model, it looks like this. It's just presenting to see what is out there. It really tries to cover this full development life cycle and every single security practice that you could be doing as part of this life cycle. As a model, the way it's built, it is built around a stable core and a toolbox. And this toolbox helps you assess organizations through the lens of SAM and helps you build a plan to remediate any findings that you might have. And it's supposed to be automation friendly. We already have a few companies that we know of that have built either for internal or for external use something better than the Excel toolbox that we provide out of the box. More value comes from the continuously expanding guidance. So what we try to do is we publish guidance with the core team, with the community on how to use SAM in a variety of organizations. SAM for agile development, SAM for tangible products, this kind of thing. There's also a set of mappings, a growing set of mappings. And I'll explain why SAM is valuable, especially in collaboration with this mappings a little bit later. But we see this really as an implementation tool, and these mappings help you set the target towards what you are building, basically. And then we have a helpful community and a growing set of experts. That's the thing. Every week, every few weeks, we have new people that we see pop up in the OWASP Slack. So that's the QR code to follow and say, hey, I'm new to SAM. Can you help me get started? I'm new to SAM. I have these questions. And other people start helping. It's not just the core team providing guidance. Although I always joke, if you want free consultancy from me, hit me up in the OWASP Slack. I'm happy to answer any questions on SAM. And there's this famous quote from George Box that mentions all models are wrong, but some are useful. And SAM by itself is most useful because it supports this risk management. Already in the previous webinar, I mentioned you should be looking for a security champion. Someone in your organization should own product security. Because this change management that I mentioned, this is new for a lot of organizations. And someone needs to be technical enough to understand what needs to happen on a product level, on a process level, and be able to function on a high level enough to form the bridge between management, to get change management done in the organization. So if you haven't done so, go find this person. Very often, they are grown in your organization with training, with support. They're facilitating picking up this new role. These are not people at the moment you can find on the street easily. Most of them, they become consultants after a while. So when you find one, keep good care of them. This person will need to have a look at the standards, which I already mentioned. There's a bunch of standards coming that are going to help you implement the Cyber Resilience Act. So you don't each time have to go to the very high level requirements that are described in the regulation itself. You can go to the standard and see what on a process level that they recommend. And that's the thing. These standards tell you the what. They tell you in a more specific way, if a assessor would come to your organization, what would they be looking for? The thing is, this what remains on a high level. It remains open for interpretation. And these standards will need to be applied for the context of your product and for your organization. And SAM helps you fill in the blanks for the how. So if you're looking for examples of cyber resilience and the security requirements that are coming, the principle of cyber resilience standard is now open for comments. Just a brief remaining period. It is open for public consultation. And this is the first standard describing in a very high level how an organization should build a product that is secure by design and secure by default. Please go and have a look to see what might be coming for you. The official publication would only be in August next year. So now is your opportunity to really weigh in and maybe even help make the standard more pragmatic, because currently it is not at a level that can be shared directly with users. I cannot give this standard to a user and to anyone basically and have them build a secure product. So for now, SAM helps you fill in what's under the waterline again. So if we're looking at the principles of cyber resilience, I already explained that your risk assessment is tied to threat modeling. Threat modeling helps you identify how, or basically helps you determine how far you need to go when implementing the security requirements, so the essential requirements. Of course, they need to be tested. It's not just functional requirements. You need non-functional, you need to cover your non-functional aspects of your security requirements too. You need to make sure that your configuration, again, is secure by default, and your product is adequately hardened. You need to take into account data protection if your product is having potentially data that's under GDPR. And all of this is linked back to compliance management, because of course there is this external entity that might come and have a look to see if you're doing a good job. And the way that SAM provides you with this how and explains what needs to happen under the waterline is by relying on these 3 maturity levels. In essence, there's actually 4, because you could be not doing anything. That's what we call practice unfulfilled. On a level of 1, you're doing ad hoc provision. And for most organizations, for many organizations, ad hoc provisions might be what they're going to do for a product that they're developing right now. Doing this once, just gathering documentation, gathering information, dumping every information in an Excel file, that's okay, and be compliant with that. But as I mentioned, the hardest thing is making sure that something becomes a continuous process. So at a maturity level of 2, this is what you're getting. A process that is repeatable, that is consistent, and is also becoming more efficient and effective. And then finally, at the maturity level of 3, what we're seeing, comprehensive mastery at scale. This is where we see many of the different SAM practices intersect, start to depend on each other, and basically becoming better. Now, the maturity level of 3 is reserved only for the most mature set of organizations. We don't expect every organization to strive for this, but it's there because some of these organizations that are using SAM require this level of maturity. They are at the scale that this is needed. If we're now filling this in for the practice of threat modeling, what we're seeing is on a maturity level of 1, you're doing best effort risk-based threat modeling using brainstorming. And so this is really getting some people in a room, drawing on a whiteboard and having discussions. On a maturity level of 2, you're going to standardize. We're going to use the 4 questions framework. We're going to use Stride. This is what our output looks like internally, externally. This is where we keep the documentation. And with a maturity level of 3, what you're going to get is that your whatever you're creating, so the last questions, did we do a good job? It is no longer just covering your actual threat model. Did we cover all of the risks? But it's also covering your process. Are we covering risks in a continuous manner? Is our process as good as it could be? Is our training as good as it could be? Is there anything else we could do? And by having these maturity levels, 1 second, the camera just jumped. I see the color changing. Okay. So these 4 maturity levels help you determine where you need to be for your specific use case. And if you are already in the habit of determining what is the right level of maturity for your organization, what your process needs to look like in order to be what your process needs to look like for your organization in order to be effective, what you're getting is that your organization becomes a little bit accustomed to seeing what the what is, and then filling in the blanks for the how. Basically, right now, this might be using SAM in order to make sure that you're having compliant processes according to the Cyber Resilience Act. But there's many more legislative processes or many legislations that are upcoming. So in the UK, we have the PSTI. In India, we'll soon have the Tech Code of Practice for securing consumer IoT. In Australia, we have the Cyber Resilience Act. In China, we have mandatory vulnerability reporting already. Japan and the United States are both working on cybersecurity labeling schemes. And so this means that depending on the market that you are building products for, your goals might continuously shift in a little bit. And if you're using SAM, you can abstract from the what that each of these legislations requires you to do. It's not just legislations, it's also standards. So that's what I mentioned. The mappings are what makes SAM really valuable and allows you to directly use SAM as this model for implementing compliance. So if you look back into all of the processes that I at least highlighted in the last webinar that you need to follow for Cyber Resilience Act compliance, these are directly required by the legislation. What we did with the SAM core team is we made a mapping where we specified the SAM quality criteria. Quality criteria are what you evaluate when you're basically assessing an organization for SAM. So what you have here, do you classify applications according to business risk based on a simple and predefined set of questions? This is in SAM. SAM expects you to at least have an up-to-date and agreed upon risk classification. And by using requirements enhancements, we made sure that it's directly applicable to the Cyber Resilience Act. What we're also trying to do is having a baseline mapping for a general organization. What would be a standard CRA baseline that you can use? And this is really, really, really hard to determine. Both of these mappings for now live a little bit apart, and they're in draft. By scanning the QR code, at least you get access, and this should be a comment link, so you're able to look into this and place comments, help us make this mapping better. We're also working on guidance from the SAM core team. For example, in SAM being a application security model, operations part is at this moment written as if you're hosting the product, more SaaS oriented. But it just requires a little bit of interpretation because someone else is now hosting your product, but they are going to need to do incident detection. They're not going to need to do incident response. And you need to, for example, give them the tools, give them documentation that allows them to do so. So when you're implementing SAM, the way you're doing this is, first of all, you do this baseline assessment of your current product. And what we see is the first time scores might be low, and that is okay, because SAM is an opinionated model. It expects you to do certain processes in a certain way. Then you set your target, and your target is basically your North Star, where you're moving against over a multi-year period often. What we see is, what we see is often 2 years before processes are accurately implemented to a level that you slowly build a product that is CRA compliant. And so each time you do reassessment at fixed iterations, this provides you with a chronometer. And having your North Star, this is what provides you your compass. So, you know, if you want to navigate an unknown landscape or an unknown sea, compass and a chronometer would be quite handy and get you everywhere. In essence, if we overlay this with the timeline for the Cyber Resilience Act, what we do get is a little bit more compressed set of milestones, because the first thing that's coming is the vulnerability management. So Annex 1, Part 2, the vulnerability handling requirements. In essence, what these require you to do is make sure that from an external, any external party basically can contact you if they find out that there's a vulnerability. So this is called implementing a coordinated vulnerability disclosure, but also the process that allows you to do vulnerability handling and handle any request or any reported vulnerability that's reported to you. Making sure it translates into your internal defect management system. It gets to the right team and it gets accurately prioritized. Making sure that you're able to provide patches in a secure manner to your to patch whatever vulnerability was reported to you. But then also, I would say proactively making sure that you know what third-party libraries, what third-party dependencies are in your product. Making sure that your build process, your deployment processes are automated and at least documented in a way that support you to quickly roll out patches. Because vulnerability handling is going to need to be a well-oiled machine in your organization going forward. At least by by September next year, you will need to be able to report actively exploited incidents. You will need to have in place this policy for coordinated vulnerability disclosure. You will need to make sure that you are available for people to contact you about security matters and that you are able to triage whatever is reported to you and actually handle the vulnerabilities when applicable. And this boils down to being good at assessing risk and has this aspect of compliance management, because all of this stuff on screen needs to provide some form of evidence that can prove that you're doing what is expected of you. Of course, what's now on screen, the other thing, you need to be proactive. So you need to be scanning, and you need to have a way of retiring old stuff or old products in a timely manner. And now it's up to you. I would recommend you to perform a SAM assessment and take into account the technical documentation requirements from Annex 7 and Annex 2, the essential requirements from Annex 1, Part 1, and the vulnerability handling requirements from Annex 1, Part 2. And based on this SAM assessment, create a product security strategy. And this product security strategy should be boiled down into policies that cover both security development and vulnerability handling at minimum. So quickly still, how are you going to do this SAM assessment? I would recommend you to start with what's called a reference product, a product that is representative of the type of products that you're going to be deploying after the Cyber Resilience Act goes into force. And when you're going to do this, focus on a single product or a small subset of products that take part in the same security development lifecycle. I already mentioned that the person you're needing, security champion, needs to be technical. They need to be technical so that they can talk nuts and bolts with the people that are actually going to build the secure products. And this person needs to act as a kind of a translator between SAM, the Cyber Resilience Act requirements, into the process and the way of working of the team. And SAM helps them doing so. So when it's up to them to then assess these teams and ask them, in this case, for example, do you scan applications with automated security testing tools? Represented here as, how do you drive nails? Well, if your development team answer, well, we have SonarQube here, and one developer set it up. Every once in a while, we look at it. This might be represented by the stone hammer. It is up to the security champion to then verify if that is adequate for the level of security that is expected of the product. Whether it's better than what they need to do, whether they need a better tool, whether they need something fully featured, and then recommend to the team, well, ideally, this is what I recommend that you do, and score. Put the score. That's the whole assessment, taking into account again the context of the team, the context of the product. And once you have this score, you need to know that scores are relative. They are relative to the assessor, to the context, to the product, and that's okay. As long as you have a consistent way of scoring, it is okay for now. Targets are also relative. I mentioned some teams might be building a children's toy that just has a Bluetooth connectivity to make beep boop noises. Unfortunately, that happens. The other team might be building an industrial automation control system. Their scores will be wildly different, as they should be, and their targets should be even more different. And right now, your target is making sure that you appropriately address what's being required for the Cyber Resilience Act. Once you're setting this target, it's a bit, again, up to the champion to communicate this back to the individual teams, again, acting kind of like a translating engine. And where SAM really comes into its own is because it allows you to, it allows basically the team to take ownership of the roadmap. When properly, when someone who knows SAM well enough is able to translate now what needs to happen into the team, what they can do is they put this in their backlog and they manage the work that needs to happen like they would do any product development. And that's the nice thing, because this allows you to check in with the team if they're getting enough time to patch the security issues, if they're able to, they use all the team tools that are available of them to slowly mature over time. So in that sense, SAM helps you operationalize policies. It helps you link whatever the team is doing to the Cyber Resilience Act underlying process requirements. And it allows you to, of course, make sure that the team is providing the right evidences, the right outputs, so that a third party might come and eventually assess whether your CE declaration, your declaration of conformity is valid. Now, one thing I mentioned, larger organizations. If you have a large organization, your management might need to want to know how well a team is doing. That's another thing that SAM really helps with. We have ways of rolling out SAM in a programmatic way, and then using a metric called percentage to target to evaluate whether teams are actually making progress on their roadmap. And this is a great way of reporting up to management and keeping also a finger on the pulse of whether teams are properly supported, basically, and are focusing on implementing what needs to be done. And it allows you also to structure initiatives, like, for example, the rollout of a SAS scanning tool or the rollout of training linked to targets, depending on the maturity that your team has. And let's not forget, an organization is not about building products. It's often just a bunch of people. What SAM also helps you with is link the activities that need to be done to other more specific standards, to other projects that are more relevant. So we often see SAM being used with DSOM for security requirements, ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard. And SAM has all of these links. So when the level of granularity that SAM provides is not the right level of granularity for the end user, this can be adapted. It also gives you access to SAM practitioners like us to support not just a security champion in rolling out SAM for their organization, but also to provide training. And this is what you should be doing as an absolute priority one. Take away anything from this training. Please make sure that you train the people that actually need to build secure products. Because in the end, it's an outcome-based regulation. The goal should not be to be CRA compliant. The goal should be to support secure products. And you only do this when everyone that touches your product at least is aware of how to do this. And with that, I kind of rushed through the presentation because I saw the time ticking. It's time for Q&A. 1 second. Yeah, I have it here. So please post your questions in the chat. Check here. So Lara, remote processing solutions. Thank you very much. Lara has filled in the blank that I that I added. Anyone else who has a question at this point in the webinar that you would like me to answer? Yeah, 1 second. So are there any frameworks for the risk assessment, or how would you tackle this from scratch? So Seppe, as I mentioned, I think there are some frameworks. Most of the frameworks that would be potentially applicable still are IT or business risk assessment frameworks. So the ones that would be applicable are the ones that have the concept of assets, which you could use for either an asset as the product or assets as in individual component of the product. I mentioned Octave Allegro, which is a methodology. EBOS Risk Manager is another one that's not really widely used. There's a few ones that could be used, but there's a there's a wide spectrum of risk assessment methodologies that are currently available. There are very few that I can recommend to an organization that has never done this before immediately for product risk management. So that's one of the reasons why I recommended just start already with the 4 questions framework, because it is in total, I don't think it's 15 pages, the PDF. It is really easy to read. It's really easy to do, and it allows you to already come up with this right mindset. So especially if you're I would say, a more lean organization, in the build versus buy, build something for risk assessment, as long as you take into account that you need to if someone else would come and ask you, prove me that you did your due diligence, that you used this assessment to select what cybersecurity requirements or to what level of cybersecurity you need to do. This needs to be formally enough described. So you will probably need to read a bit on risk assessment. There's many trainings on there on risk assessment. You could even take inspiration from a methodology and then still build your own more simple methodology that is easier to work with. For me, I think the real important thing is to focus on this threat modeling, because in the end, threat modeling is what's going to help you operationalize this stuff. That's why I try to explain this in the beginning. Start with something that allows you to assess risk on a very high level, and then immediately transfer basically to the technical part of addressing risk. Because in the end, if you're going to describe your product in a traditional way, you're going to build these risk matrices with everything that could go wrong. You still need to make a translation to give this to your technical team. And threat modeling lives way closer to the way organizations develop products right now already, and is a much smoother link between the high-level threat assessment and then what needs to be done on a product level. From Nariman. So how the upcoming standards for SEN and SENLIC fit into the picture of working on CRA readiness? Do we need to define a roadmap and activities based on those standards? Well, in the end, the standards, specifically on the vulnerability handling and on the cybersecurity requirements, they're going to provide you with presumption of conformity, meaning that if you implement these standards, you're going to be conformant to the Cyber Resilience Act. This is something that SAM cannot give you. But then again, the standards is going to describe you the what is the stuff you need to put in place. And so SAM helps you build this roadmap. In the end, yes, I absolutely recommend you to have a read at the standards, even though it could be an abstract or boring read. I like reading them, but I know that I'm one of the few people there. In the end, it's what you're going to need to strive for, because the alternative, and it's okay to not use a standard, but the alternative is going back to the first principles of the regulation and being prepared to argue on these principles, on why you did different, than the standards. The standards themselves are also based on best practices. So the standards have a big overlap with the practices in SAM. From Rob, which processes or tasks are, according to your experience, the most difficult or take the longest to implement? What should we really be starting with today? You should start with training. Free training or paid training, I don't care. That is not the one that's the longest to implement, but that's the one that has the farthest reaching impact. Because people, process, technology, you first focus on the people. If everyone around the table knows, at least on a high level, what you're trying to achieve with product security, you don't need to argue with each individual again on why you need to be doing something. And you find that people are more receptive to change. Then again, the second one, I think, is again this threat modeling, because most products don't have this very defined architecture phase. It's always an iterative process. And if you're going to start threat modeling on a product that is already being built, it will take a while before you first have your threat model done, and then have a way to implement the changes that come, the recommendations basically that come out of the threat model. And that's why I mentioned it is a process that takes long. The triage, for example, of vulnerabilities is another one. It's easy to implement a scanning tool. It is very hard to build a triage process, but then less hard, I think, than implementing a scaling threat model. So I hope that helps. Any other questions? I don't see questions popping up. Then with that, I'm going to give the final word to my colleague, Jordan. Thank you all for attending the webinar, and feel free to reach out should any other questions still pop up.
So yes, hello. I would like to talk to you about CRA II as well, which is the Cyber Resilience Act made easy. As it says in the name, it is meant to keep the compliance that is coming up around it as a CRA easy to follow with European SMEs, specifically European SMEs, because it is a European funded project. My pointer isn't working.
You need to click on the presentation.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Oops. This is not working. Can you even kijken? Where is it? My apologies. Yes. So, as I said, the Cyber Resilience Act made easy. How we do that is by developing documentation, best practices, and tools. These tools, you can find, for example, online. These tools are developed by CRA II to be accessible online for example, open source toolkits. If you have any questions, you can always contact either Torian or CRA II itself to be guided on the road to an easy CRA compliance. Next, as an active partner in CRA II, Torian is very proud about that. We help with a few things to make sure that your road to compliance in the CRA is easier. We do this by operationalizing the risk assessment. We provide the how-to on the CRA's risk requirements for CRA's abstract risk requirements, because there are many. We mainly use threat modeling as the primary method, and we map identified risks directly into practical security controls. We also use automated compliance. We help you automate compliance by testing and validation, which takes the manual burden off your teams. Another thing we do is we design reference architectural patterns for complex integrations, specifically cloud-based identity and access management for PDEs. And the last thing we help with is knowledge exchange. We absorb legal expertise from our partners and convert it to technical expertise for the public, which is you, we hope. And that is exactly why, as Torion, we would like to thank the CRA project for partnering with us in helping making CRA compliance more easy. So with that, we would like to thank you again for paying attention to our webinar. We hope it was useful, that you have information that you can take to your company yourself. And if you have any questions, be sure to contact Torion. We have a lot of experts that are available for you if you have any questions. So with that, I would like to say goodbye.